Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... Happy New Year! Damn, I cannot believe 2021 is already over. And as I sit back to reflect on that year, I realized that I didn't live up to some of the goals that I had set for myself. Like, one of the goals I had was to read 20 books that had been recommended to me by my viewers. However, because of new books coming out and me wanting to join buddy reads, my brain was just all over the place. And I said to myself, 2021 will last forever. You have all the time in the world. Bullshit. Because out of the 20 books that had been recommended to me, I only read 11 of those. Then on Goodreads, I set a goal to read 50 books for the year, but I only read 36. Then, aside from reading, I did say I was going to lose some weight. I can't remember if I tied a number to that or not, but I did actually lose some weight. Just not as much weight as what I had hoped. But for 2022, I'm not going to do any type of resolution where I say I'm going to read this many books, I'm going to lose this much weight. I'm not going to do anything like that. Instead, I'm just going to put my best foot forward and do as much as I can, and whatever I can't do, shit happens. But for this year, I am hoping to read a few of the series that I had started and reviewed just so I can go in and get those off my plate. I do plan to finish reading the 9 books that had been recommended to me that I should have read last year, and I do plan to continue losing weight. So here's to hoping. Anywho, since it's the beginning of the new year, it's time for me to talk about the top 3 books that scared the ever-loving living hell out of me in 2021. Which, funny story, these were some of the books that were recommended to me by my viewers. And like previous years, I'm not going to rank these in any particular order because they were all equally frightening. First up is The Troop by Nick Cutter, which this was recommended to me by Tammy Mitchell and Justin Sawyer. So this was a book that I purchased when it first came out around 2014 because my good friend Tammy literally beat me over the head and demanded that I read this at once. However, I didn't read it until last year, and I really regret not reading it sooner because it was pure nightmare fuel. Like, for real. This is what would happen if Lord of the Flies met a David Cronenberg film. And even though the plot is extremely simple, it becomes very heavy and it turns into this twisted nightmare that is completely repulsive and frightening. If you haven't read The Troop, it focuses on 5 Boy Scouts who were under the supervision of their scoutmaster named Tim. And while they're spending the weekend in a cabin on a desolate island that has no outside communication whatsoever, a man who is infected with parasites escapes from a lab and takes refuge on that island. From here, Scoutmaster Tim tries to help the stranger, yet the troop find themselves trapped in a scenario of who will survive and what will be left of them. Y'all, it's rare that I read a book that scares me, creeps me out, and grosses me out all at the same time, but here we are. And I think the most frightening thing about The Troop is the idea that you're going to be used as a guinea pig and there's no cure out there. Which, by the way, this book has quite a few graphic scenes of animal abuse, and even though these scenes are hard to stomach, they do serve a purpose as they comment on people who have a conscience and those who don't. Also, the Shelly monster at the end was something that scared me to the point where I never want to go inside another cave as long as I live. And aside from all of that, the whole nihilistic message and concept that the troop presented was something that haunted me long after I finished reading it. Up next is Revival by Stephen King, which, very similar to what I did with The Troop, this was a book that I purchased when it first came out, then it just ended up going on my bookshelf where it collected dust. However, about a year and a half ago, the viewer Cody Williams recommended that I read this. And since Stephen King really flip-flops between horror, drama, fantasy, and sometimes all three genres in the same book, I honestly didn't know what to expect, except Cody had mentioned that The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen had inspired this. So when I went into this book, I went in pretty blindly, and by the time I was done, the nihilism and just shock of everything left me with my jaw dropped for days to come. If you haven't read Revival, this book focuses on Jamie, who tells about a time during his childhood when a new minister came to town by the name of Charlie, which we eventually see that Charlie is an all-around good guy who gives interesting sermons where he combines his love of electricity with his love of the Gospels. Yet one day, Charlie's wife and child die in an accident, and it devastates him to the point where he loses his religion. From here, the story stays focused on Jamie, and we see that Jamie encounters Charlie multiple times throughout his life. Like one time, Charlie is working in a sideshow taking photos of people with electricity. Then later on, he becomes a faith healer where he's using electricity to heal people. But things don't become extremely horrific until Charlie calls on Jamie to conduct an experiment where he can see into the afterlife. At first, this book shocked me because of how brutal and tragic the wreck was. And because of how the minister reacted to his family dying, it was just something that ripped my heart out, and emotionally I couldn't deal with that at that time, so I had to put the book aside and come back to it later. But it wasn't until the ending of the book where it scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. Like, for real, I'm pretty firm when it comes down to my spiritual beliefs, but the ending of this is something that I had never considered before, and by how it's presented, it was something that just left me feeling empty and horrified for days to come. Also, out of all of the books I've read by Stephen King, this is perhaps his most frightening and depressing work since Pet Sematary. The final book on this list is Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco, and this was recommended to me by the fabulous booktuber known as the Bookubus, which I have included a link to her channel in the description section of this episode, so be sure to check her out. Now, even though last year was my first time ever reading Burnt Offerings, I had grown up being a huge fan of the movie because it scared the hell out of me, especially the scene where the chauffeur came for Betty Davis. So it should not have been a surprise that the book was going to be equally as terrifying. If you're unfamiliar with Burnt Offerings, this book focuses on the Roth family who have decided to look for a vacation home over the summer so they can escape the confines and stress of living in the city. So, after looking around, they find this desolate old mansion that's actually being offered up for an outrageously inexpensive price by a sibling couple known as the Allardyces. However, there is one small catch because while the Roths stay here, they will need to take care of the Allardyces' elderly mother who never leaves her room. And at first, they feel a little apprehensive about this, but after the Allardyces assure them that their mother will not be a problem whatsoever, they decide to take the deal. Then, as the story progresses, we discover that there's something ancient and evil living inside of the house with them, and this entity is using the misery of the Roth family to restore the home to its former glory. This is the kind of book where when I read it as a surface read, it didn't scare me, but it did creep me out. However, the longer I sat and thought about it, the more I realized that its psychological depth over such a small period of time was absolutely terrifying. Also, because of everything that goes down and what possibly could have been the driving force behind this entity was something that haunted me for days to come. Well, those are the 3 books that scared the ever-loving living hell out of me in 2021. And if you would like to see more extensive reviews on these books, I've included links to their reviews in the description section of this episode. Also, I'm really sorry that I haven't been posting as many videos as what I normally do, but I'm still trying to work with the time management and everything in regards to my new job. So that's something I'll get worked out in the near future. But anywho, now that we have all of that out of the way, I would like to take this opportunity to thank these wonderful people for contributing to my Patreon account. Here's a list of my Patreon contributors, which, as you can see, some of them are creators, so be sure to check out their work. Also, if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have included a link in the description section of this episode. And if you're able to contribute, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. And if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this episode. Also, if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week, a happy new year, and sweet nightmares.